Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and with me is designer Alison Glass. Hello, Alison.
Hi.
And Alison is here today to show us actually a hand applique technique that I know some about, but I've never seen it used like this. And this is a raw edge reverse applique technique, and this is gorgeous. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Thank you. This is a throw. It's a little quilt, maybe even could be considered a blanket. It's using the technique reverse applique. So instead of having an applique piece that you are cutting out ahead of time and applying on top of the surface, you actually have an entire top level of fabric that is laid over the bottom layer, and in this case stitched with a pretty wide loose running stitch, and the top shapes that are cut out to reveal the fun colorful fabric underneath.
And I've seen reverse applique that's done kind of maybe in a finer, that's, you know what I mean, in terms of fine handwork or traditional application. I've never seen it done quite like this. Tell us about the top layer of fabric that you're using.
Sure,
here.
the top is a jersey knit. It's 100% cotton. I really like everything about it. It's pretty substantial, which I think gives it a really nice feel. Doesn't feel flimsy or like it's going to ravel apart. That's one of the things about that's so great about working with jersey knit, cotton knit fabric, is that you can do this raw edge technique. The edges will wear slightly over time, but they won't unravel. They'll be just fine the way they are. I love the look. I think it's a really fun kind of industrial roughness that I really love. And the thing I really like most about this technique is that I actually love just the doing of it. I think it's very meditative, and you just don't have to, it's just fun. It's a fun
It goes
time.
quickly, and so you get the satisfaction of doing handwork without necessarily some of the tedium that people might associate with it, because it does, and so the satisfaction level is really high.
Yes,
which is
for
nice.
sure.
And so this, you were saying this really didn't take you very long at all to do.
It's a larger piece, so it takes a while, but if you look at it, it probably looks like it would take a lot longer than it does. And on the smaller sample, I'll show you just how quickly it goes.
Okay.
This is a fairly large scale, the pattern on here, so you can see a lot of the fabric underneath. Someone could choose to do it on a much smaller scale as well, with a lot smaller pieces where there's more stitching and less fabric showing.
But it's a great use also for those when you buy, say, a couple of yards of a fabric because you just love it so much and you just can't bear to cut into it. This is a great way to use it, to show it off and to make it functional without having to cut it all up into little pieces.
And in a way, it's almost a whole cloth quilt, because you are using one whole piece of fabric on the bottom, and instead of spending a lot of time doing the actual quilting, the piecing, you're spending more time doing the handwork, but it really probably all evens out pretty well at the end. And it's definitely a distinctive piece with a lot of, I think, possible applications.
And it's just the two layers.
This actually, there's another layer of jersey knit on the bottom.
Oh, there is. Okay.
Because I wanted to do it as one whole piece. What we'll be doing today will just be 2 layers.
Okay.
And then that will be made into a quilt that can then be quilted or tied.
Got it.
But in this case, since it is one whole blanket, there are 3 layers. There's the jersey knit with the print on the inside, and then the second layer of jersey knit on top. So it's good to go. It's ready to be used.
Nice and warm.
Now that it's done.
Light but warm.
Right, warm but light. So this is what we are going to be looking at. I'll put that over there. Here is the piece that I want to start with.
Okay.
So what I have here is just a square of jersey knit. It's a dark gray. Underneath it, I have a colorful cotton print. This is from Clover Sunshine, and basically,
which is one of your fabric design
one of my fabric
collections.
lines that's out. I like to use safety pins. You can also choose to hand-baste or machine-baste around the edges. Really what you're trying to do here is just anchor the jersey knit to the other fabric to try to minimize the slipping. Someone could choose to put more pins than this. It's really kind of up to the individual. I like to not do too many because they end up getting in the way. And as you work, we'll start from the center and work our way out. And as you do that, you're really anchoring the fabric as you go.
Right.
And if you need to kind of stretch it a little as you go, that works out fine too. So I'll put these guys in. I've used a Sharpie marker to draw a really simple shape on this one. Probably using a Sharpie is fine. It's obviously permanent. You need to be confident about your drawing skills.
Yes.
And certainly using a water-soluble sewing pen is probably a better idea. Just doesn't show it very well on our piece of dark gray fabric. So this is what we did so that people could see the shape that we're starting with. As far as getting your shapes onto the pieces, I just free drew this quickly, but certainly using a template, either a stencil or shapes that you lay down and trace around, all of those are really great options for getting your design on the page. And in the book that I am writing that's coming out about applique, this is one of the quilts that is in the book, there are going to be a bunch of really useful templates that people can hopefully use and arrange how they want. So let's get going with stitching. We're going to be using a Perle cotton. This is a size 8 Perle, and when you use this cotton, the best way to start is to thread starting with the part that comes off of the spool. And also, as you do that, it's good to run your fingers along it, 3 or 4 times. And what all of this does is helps to, the thread is twisted. It helps to release some of the tension in the thread. And that is really helpful to avoid knots, because knots really, you end up wasting a lot of time when you could be stitching by trying to get knots out. I threaded the needle by bringing the needle down onto the thread, more so than pushing the thread into the needle. It'll help to have the ends not split open as much, and it just generally works better. Then I'm going to take my end and tie a double knot, which is basically just a simple knot with another exactly the same simple knot placed right on top of the first knot. That'll make it large enough so that it won't easily pull through. In this case, we're going to start on the back, and I like to just start at one of the points.
And you're just eyeballing it.
I am. I want it to be about 1/4 of an inch out from the line that I drew. In this case, because it's reverse applique, this drawn line will end up becoming the cut line. So once the shape is completely outlined in thread, we'll cut along that line, and that middle part will come out.
Okay.
So you kind of pull that through to start. And a lot of times when people first start out, they kind of doing the plunging down and going all the way through and plunging up. Really, a better way to do it is to try to get a nice rhythm going, where you're using the needle going up and down in more of a rocking motion. So I'll just go down and use my thumb to position to help me come back up. Stitches of anywhere between about 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch are appropriate. Benefits to using this motion rather than going up and down is that you are not putting nearly as much strain on the thread either. So it doesn't, every time you pull the thread through, it wears out fibers.
Right.
This way you're pulling just at once and you're getting a nice bit done at a time. So you can see that goes pretty fast.
Yeah,
this
and you
was
loaded,
one,
what is it, 4, 5 stitches on there?
1, 2, 3, 4,
I can
5,
count.
5, 6. The needles I like to use are pretty long.
Yeah.
They are Milliner's size 1 is what I prefer. I like the length of it because you really can put a lot of stitches on it at a time. I can probably get around this shape in 6 to 7 stitches. So it goes really very fast.
And you're not using a hoop with this method. It's just a
I'm
lap
not using a
quilting
hoop. I
technique,
don't
if you
like
will.
to use a hoop because I like to be able to hold the fabric up like this and use my fingers to help push the needle in and out of the fabric. You could use a hoop, but I don't prefer it because I just don't think it's very helpful.
Yeah, it's just so many tools and whatever works best for you.
People should certainly experiment and see what they like.
I've not tried this particular technique, and now I shall have to go home and try it like
good.
this.
So I would finish stitching around, and then at the bottom I would do another double knot to finish things off.
On the wrong side?
On the other side, right? So here is a piece that has its design stitched on there, and then you just begin cutting.
Now this is one that you stitched without marking, is that correct?
I did stitch this one without marking.
You have a very good eye.
Well, it's probably not.
But we're going to infer that there are cut lines.
We're going to
on
pretend
here.
that there's a cut line
Yeah, okay.
that I'm cutting on. Pretend that that line is there. So I'm using the tip of my very sharp, small scissor. I'm holding it upside down because for whatever reason it works better that way for me.
Okay.
And I can't explain why, I just know that it does. And I am making sure that I can feel that I'm picking up just the knit and
Okay.
that I've separated it from the cotton that's underneath it and just making a little clip to start. And then you insert that in and you're basically just cutting around the shape, the whole thing. You want to leave, the reason that you are coming out about 1/4 of an inch, at least from the edge, is that you want to be sure that you have about 1/4 of an inch of fabric there so that the stitches don't eventually pull through. It needs enough to be able to grab on. So I'm going to try to kind of quickly do this so that we can show what it looks like when you take out one of the pieces. I love this part of it because it's just really fun to see what sort of pattern you get underneath. This time we did not get any of the other little dots, but another time maybe we will.
Right.
I know there's one over here somewhere. So you just continue to cut around all the shapes and eventually end up with a, in this case, a quilt block that is from another project in the book. Here's a couple more from that project where, you know, it's more of a sampler project that I'm really excited about, where people can people can practice all of the different techniques that are in the book, because there's a lot of them, and have little bits and pieces that eventually can be joined together to make a fun kind of eclectic sampler quilt.
And that's by design. So
Yes,
that they can
by
all hang
design.
together and
Right,
look
right.
nice.
Yeah,
Tell us
for
a little
sure.
bit about this technique here.
This technique is similar to reverse applique, but it's actually called negative reverse applique.
So, okay.
You start in the same way, where you have a full piece of the top fabric on top of the bottom piece of fabric, and but instead of stitching on the outside of the cut line, you actually are stitching on the inside of the cut line.
Okay.
So the shapes end up staying and the background ends up falling away. It's exactly the same thing, just a little opposite of where the stitches are. And then this is a raw edge wool applique piece
Okay.
for the most part.
And
So,
you're using more of a is that a blanket stitch that around the edges there, or?
whip
Just-
stitch.
yeah, okay.
Whip stitch
I see.
is what we're calling it in the book. Blanket stitch would be different, but this one, there's no line there. So
I
it's
see.
a
That's
whip
what I'm trying to
stitch,
see.
but a little one.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are from that project. And
Then let's take a look at this gorgeousness right here.
this is another quote from the book. It's called Overgrown. It is a more traditional style of applique in the sense that it's a turned edge applique. We're looking at raw edges as turned edge. So there's a whole bunch of techniques in there about how to get the edges turned. But the bottom line is they're turned. There's a little tiny stitch, a little whip stitch going all the way around. And these pieces are patchwork
Yeah.
before they're turned. And this is just another example of a quote from the book that I just want to share, that there's a large range of possibilities with applique, and what we're trying to do with the applique is bring a lot of those techniques to the forefront so that people can see all the interesting things they can do, and
Right.
all the fun things that have been used a lot in more traditional quilting, and then applied it to maybe a more modern style.
Right, and kind of reinvigorate it in some ways and show new applications. And like you said, this patchwork, a patchwork applique, it's not something you see very often. And these are very
right.
large pieces as well.
Yes, it is a very large scale applique, which is another, I think a lot of times people think of applique as being little tiny pieces. Well, it doesn't have to be. It can
Right.
be on a big scale. It can, there's just so many possibilities, and it's a type of sewing that I really love,
Yeah.
and I'm so excited to get to share.
I love
with.
anytime we can have somebody come on the show and talk about hand techniques, because sometimes we hear chatter that people think that it's a dying art form, and it absolutely is not. It's maybe not as prevalent as machine techniques these days, but there are always new fans, and we hope this episode will make fans of people out there watching it. So the book is coming out in 2014.
Yes, in the fall.
Great. So be sure to check Alison's website to keep an eye out for that, as well as her other patterns and fabric lines and thread lines and everything else that you've got going on. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And sharing this with us. Beautiful work.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye. Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters Community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.